try again. In 2010, about 3 years after he had disappeared suddenly, Munna resurfaced just as suddenly. He had been picked up on the streets of Kochi and brought to Sneha Children's Home. They shifted him to Kottayam within a day and so. By the time I heard about Munna, he was already gone. But this time, I was not willing to let go that easily. I tracked down the number of sender in Kottayam and managed to contact him. The first call was very brief and perfunctory. Munna was very quiet and diffident, and I could barely hear him over the phone. At the next call, he sounded more like the Munna I knew. But before we could establish a proper line of communication, he was gone again. He was shifted once more to a government home in Hyderabad in an attempt to trace his family and restore him to it. I managed to track down once again and speak to him. But I had not the slightest clue about what could be done next. I called up Jitin desperately and we decided to see what we could do for Munna. He put the president of MAD, Hyderabad, in charge of the operation, and that is how I met Gloria Benny. She certainly knew how to put things into their proper perspective. Once she came on board, the whole quagmire went from a fuck-up situation to a new learning experience. To me, Gloria is a hero twice over. Gloria's insight about this screw-up being a learning experience has stayed with me ever since. Her words were like a little rain falling at the right time on a fertile ground. It has always helped me calm down, step back and look for positives in a situation. A life-changing experience, if you will. Gloria was also a hero in the more conventional sense. She actually went through a burning city to find a way out of the maze for Munna. That's one of the best things about my MAD experience. The awesome people I have met and worked with. Gloria had a very conventional, sheltered childhood. Born into a religious Christian family, she completed her schooling in the Gulf, after which she came down to Kochi to do her graduation. She joined Sacred Heart College and was soon hanging out with Jitin, who was her college classmate, and Sujit Burki, who was her tuition classmate. With a rather austere religious upbringing, Gloria had little in common with the head-banging, rule-breaking duo, but they got on well nevertheless. And being in their company also led to a gradual softening of some of her personal percepts. So, when MAD started, it was natural for Gloria to be roped in. When Jitin first informed Gloria about starting MAD, it brought to fore her long-shelved childhood desire starting an orphanage, and she found herself saying yes rather eagerly. In a sense, Matt seemed to have given a concrete shape to many of her secret dreams. Gloria became the sender head for one of the girls' shelter homes in Kochi, Maria's Children's Home. It was not really an orphanage, more of a shelter for girls who were economic destitutes, and it provided for their physical and educational needs. While it was a well-run center, for the nuns who were in charge, discipline was the top priority. There was a great deal of focus on schedules and things that should not be done. The latter was a long list which kept lengthening as new circumstances emerged. So the entry of Mad added a few more don'ts to the list. Don't interact with the volunteers on a personal level. Don't chat with them after class. Don't take their numbers or call them after class. Gloria believed that she was well prepared for the task she had taken up. She would go in every week for 2 hours, teach and disengage. This was the model of the teaching learning process she had observed and experienced all her life. Reality turned out to be hugely different. The girls at the shelter home were so brimming over with enthusiasm that they made eager beavers look like passive slugs by comparison. I had never seen anyone so keen to learn or so happy to hang around a teacher, Gloria recollects. The nerds I had known in school and college were no match for these impressionable young girls. They listened and studied with great intensity, but they also had an all-consuming curiosity about the outside world. They lived a rather cloistered life, and we were their bridge to the life beyond. They lapped up eagerly the whiff of the outside world that we brought in with us, and nothing escaped their scrutiny, not even a tiny new earring worn by a volunteer. It was my first shot at being a celebrity. Gloria went in all gung-ho about creating an impact on the girls. What she did not account for was the impact they would have on her. She realized soon enough that the value she brought into their lives went well beyond language learning. Her students were emotionally fragile students. Her students were emotionally fragile kids who looked to her for nurturing. They hungered for her attention, scrounged for opportunities to engage her in conversations, and sought her approval at every turn. They fought for opportunities to hold her back and kept track of the number of times she called upon them in class. If she did not call out to a student in class or gave another extra attention, a huge emotional storm would descend on the classroom. I had to watch every word and mark every move because the smallest of my actions brought forth huge reactions, says Gloria. The 2 hour slot that she had allotted them in her schedule had to be stretched considerably because disengagement was becoming quite impossible. The popularity of MAD was, however, confined to the classrooms. MAD volunteers found themselves under constant scrutiny of the nuns. No male volunteers were allowed to teach at the center, and sisters expressed annoyance if any male volunteers as much as entered the campus. It was always a struggle to get permission to bring in volunteers to repair the computers installed by man. But they chugged along nevertheless, taking on each roadblock as it came. Jitin has an amusing story about his gulab jamun diplomacy at the center. A new sister who took in charge at Maria's Children's Home turned out to be an extreme mad skeptic who made it difficult for mad classes to function smoothly. She was a tough nut to crack, fobbing off repeated efforts by mad volunteers to reach out to her. At last, they chanced upon her one weakness, a sweet tooth. Jitin promptly turned up at her door the next day the tin of gulab jamuns, with a follow through every few weeks. The steady flow of gulab jamuns ensured a smooth passage at Maria's Children's Home for mad volunteers hereafter. Gloria did not tell her parents that she was joining the organization. Disapproving parents seems to be a narrative she has in common with Jitin. Fear of the unknown, she reasons. Treading the uncharted territory seems to make parents uncomfortable. They are uncertain where you might end up. Hyderabad was where she ended up after her graduation, working for Google. She started a mad chapter in the city between her job and heading Mad Hyderabad. She had her hands pretty full. About this time, she informed her parents about her mad activities, and true to form, they weren't exactly thrilled. But their disapproval did not really encroach into her space since she lived away from home and did not have to confront it on a daily basis. Gloria's eternal regret remains not going in to say her goodbyes when she left for Hyderabad. A couple of months later, while in Kochi, she went to visit her ex-students at Maria's Children's Home. She was completely unprepared for the slew of emotions she encountered. It sounds pretty lame to admit this, she says. But even after being their teacher for a year, I had not realized how closely and intensely they held onto the few personal relationships they had. My sudden disappearance created a vacuum in their lives, which was obviously quite hard for them to deal with. It would have been easier on them if I had prepared them for my departure and handed them over to the next volunteer teacher. But it was a learning experience. As it turned out, the Munna case was tailor-made for someone who relished learning experiences. And so, Gloria was the perfect person to handle it on behalf of man. Subsequent to my call to Jitin, He got in touch with Gloria and asked her to check out the ground realities. The only information we had at that point was that Munna was at the juvenile center at Saifabad, which was on the outskirts of Hyderabad. Since no other information was forthcoming from the authorities over the phone, Gloria decided to leg in Gloria decided to let to Gloria decided to leg it to the center to check on Munna. Resender Sudit Burki, who also went along. They were accompanied by 3 other volunteers who were all equally committed to seeing this through and a lawyer. It seemed like a good idea to get some legal advice because, despite the minimal information they had, it was obvious that there were legal issues involved in this case. It was to be a day of great eye-openers for them, each one more dramatic than the next. When they reached the address, they found themselves in front of a fortified jail-like structure. With much trepidation, they entered, only to find, to their horror, that it was indeed a prison. I was numb with disbelief. How could they keep a child in a prison? Says Gloria. Just then, one of the prison officials came up to them and they realized that the juvenile center was on the other side of the building. Their relief was, however, short-lived. The juvenile home was within the prison complex. It shared a common compound and was in fact not all that different from the prison. The juveniles were all confined in a building which was all doors and gates. As we entered the building, we came upon a metallic gate which was apparently kept locked all times. Through the gate, we could see a long corridor with doors on each side. The corridor was the dullest shade of blue possible, and there were children running around on it. It was scary and creepy and extremely claustrophobic. They were escorted through the gate and the corridor to the office by a guy who held a huge metallic rod in his hand at all times. Perhaps it was just meant to symbolize control. I don't think it was used to discipline the children, she says. Uncertain but hopeful. But I, for one, found it terrifying to have it waved around me. Munna was brought in to meet them. He was quiet and subdued and spoke little, just answering their queries and mindful of the center authorities hovering around. Later, in discussion with the center authorities, they were told that details gathered from Munna pointed towards his home being somewhere in the vicinity of Nellore district. So the plan was to shift him to the government shelter home in Tirupati as soon as possible, since this shelter home handled all the Nellore cases and tried to restore him to his family. On the way back, the volunteer's father briefed them about the legal standing of the case. Munna was now in state custody and processes to deal with his case were already in motion. In the given scenario, it would be very difficult to waylay the system and get him out even if they had a better deal for him. If, however, they managed to track down his family and get their permission, they could then make suitable provisions to secure his future. Unless that happened, there was little chance of them being able to do anything to change Munna's circumstances. It was a depressing thought. It was obvious that staying in that juvenile center would do nothing for Munna's welfare. Not only were the children all cooped up in the building, they were never ever sent out to play, not even in their own ground. Moreover, the children were all dumped together with no heed given to their age or background. So the runaways were housed with the crime accused, and this obviously did not bode well for the younger, weaker lot. Education was mere eyewash, with teachers coming into the building and clubbing them all together in a single classroom, oblivious to their age and academic capability. Rehabilitation or reformation was a very remote possibility for the juveniles caged up there. The institution was geared towards confining the children and keeping them secluded from the mainstream. In essence, it was no different from the prison to which it was attached. It was a prison for the children. The only positive from the visit was the fact that they had managed to sneak a telephone number to Munna, which evidently provided him with a degree of solace. He called them every chance he had, never letting them shelve him into the back of their mind. The old Munna was back with a bang. There were 2 more visits to Munna, with no headway being made. And then he was moved to a shelter home in Tirupati. But his repeated calls continued, with pleas to get him out. With no clear agenda yet, Gloria decided to look in on Munna to reassure him. The trip was jinxed, with Telangana agitation leading to riots and bus burning all over the state. Nonetheless, she made the 600-kilometer journey from Hyderabad to Tirupati to meet Munna, dreading the condition in which she would find him. Her fears were unfounded, and the shelter home was far better than the one in Hyderabad. It was far from an ideal place for kids, but what a relief to see children running around the place. That gave it some semblance of normalcy. She had gone with no expectation of progress, but miraculously, the visit provided them with a major breakthrough. One of the children at the home told Gloria that he had seen Munna at this center before this, that this was his second stint at the center. At this point, Gloria was not certain if the information was true, and besides, Munna was very non-committal when questioned. With no leads in hand and tired of playing the waiting game, she decided to follow up on the information. The shelter home was unable to confirm if Munna had been at the center previously, but they were willing to share their records with her. It all seemed simple enough, and they were overjoyed at how smoothly things were proceeding until they entered the record room. It was a large room of which every wall was lined with files from the floor to the ceiling. Every piece of furniture, every cupboard, every shelf was bulging and overflowing with dusty files and documents. There were hundreds upon thousands of files stacked up as far as eye could see and as high as the hand could reach. Their only hope of finding a clue to Munna's family lay somewhere midst the chaos. Maybe. A huge, big maybe. A needle is a haystack was a phrase that sprang up in each of our minds. I had no hope. What were the chances really? Asked Gloria. But left with no alternative, Gloria reached out to the nearest tab and began pulling out and scrutinizing the files. Within minutes, I had Munna's record file in my hand. Gloria's eyes shine with pleasure as she recalls that moment. It was more than a miracle. It was better than magic. I was blown away by the sheer wonder of that moment. Even now, I find it impossible to believe that such a thing could have happened. Finding the file was cause enough for a mega celebration. But finding a phone number inside? By now, we were too stunned by the series of miracles to react anymore. You could have knocked us all over with a single feather. The phone number belonged to Munna's uncle, and when contacted, he confirmed his identity, acknowledged his nephew, and agreed to come to Tirupati and pick up Munna. But the days stretched into weeks and months, and finally, 3 months after the phone call, Munna's uncle came and escorted the impatient boy back home. That would have been a happy ending to the story. If the story had ended right there. Just a few days after, he was reunited with his family. Munna's incessant calls to Gloria began once more. Munna's family had sent him off to work, and that was not what he wanted. Finally, Gloria went to see his family at Nellore. They lived in a typical slum-type settlement with narrow, winding walkways between tiny, dingy homes. The entire area crisscrossed with overflowing gutters. At Munna's home, a warm welcome awaited them in the form of delicious mutton biryani. Over lunch, they met Munna's mother and sister, his uncle and aunt, and they discussed the matter of Munna's education. Munna's family obviously needed the meager amounts that Munna's work brought in, but they were not averse to Munna's further studies either. In fact, they had already enrolled him in a night school. But Munna pouted and stamped and insisted on full-time schooling. Eventually, the family agreed and Munna was allowed to go with Mam and continue from where he had left off at Sneha Children's Home, Kochi. So, why Kochi instead of continuing in Hyderabad? Munna insisted that he wanted to come back to Kochi and his decision was based on twin attachments to me and to the center. After wandering through several government homes, I suppose Munna finally realized what a good thing he had going at Sneha's children's home. As the only person who had cared enough to follow up on him, he wanted to hang onto the bond that the two of us had built up. As for mad volunteers, our decision was based on pure energy. I can see that when I look back now. We believed that once he came to Sneha's children's home, the intervening years would just disappear and he would begin his life from the point of severance. He had always been a bright student, and we believed that given his newfound enthusiasm for returning to the fold, he would now work at reaching his full potential. The situation was tailor made for a happy ending. Again, if the story had ended right there.